name is Erin Busbee. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. When I was 6 years old, I was at a playground or a park, and I'm playing with a kid there, and their parent comes over and introduces himself to me and is like, "Hey, little guy, like, what's your name?" And I tell them Erin. And he continues on this conversation with me, and I knew that he thought that I was a boy, and I was really happy with that. When I was like around middle school, I kind of had my first realization that people are going to judge me by the way that I dress, or that the way that I look could say something about like sexuality. And so I definitely went through a much more like feminine phase at that time, until I ended up coming out in high school. When I was about 15 years old, I had just come out to my dad. We were in the basement talking, and initially his response was pretty positive. He was asking me questions about, saying that maybe he had thought about it before. And he also asked me if I wanted to be a boy. I said no, pretty matter of factly. The conversation continued, and he just told me that he loved me and he just wanted me to be safe. He was worried about, how much harder life would be for me, but he, loved me regardless. He cried as well, which is the first time I'd ever seen my dad cry. So it's an emotional moment. So when I got to college, during freshman orientation, actually, we were staying in the dorm and, going around, and I met this guy and we were hanging out the whole time. We got really cool. Probably day 2 into the orientation, and we're, hanging out that day, and we made a stop to go to the bathroom. And, I got a little bit nervous, and he heads into the bathroom and he's like, "Oh, are you coming? Do you have to go?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm fine." And then in that moment, I was like complete panic, because I'm like, he thinks I'm a guy and we're really far in right now. So like, how do I backtrack out of this? So I think it might have been around like lunchtime that day. I know we were sitting down and we just kind of had an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation. And I was just like, "By the way, I'm a girl." He was just like, I'm sorry." And then that was it. And then from then on, we just continued our interactions the same way. He just knew not to invite me into the men's bathroom anymore. Everything was cool, but it was at that moment where I realized, like, oh, this is going to be an issue. I had like recently kind of cut my hair, so it was not completely sure, but I had these little like twists that were like some crisscross 90s twists in my hair. And so I was like, oh, if I want people to see me as a woman, I'm going to have to do something different with my hair. I'm going to need it to be longer. Because at that time, I was pretty much like, I know what clothes I'm comfortable in and what I want to wear, but I just have to present, my face and my actual, like my body more femininely. At this time, I'm still, deciding that I'm identifying as a woman and I want people to see me that way. And then somebody like saying like, "Hey sir, how are you?" And it just catches me off guard, because I'm like, how do I interact with you? Like, what do I do now? So in that process, I started to think like, well, should I just transition kind of? Am I transgender? Like, what does this mean? Do I want to be a man? And so I really did a lot of research. I was looking up like surgeries and hormones and what all of it meant and what parts were reversible. And I knew that for me, it wasn't an issue of like having an issue with my body, or feeling like I, needed to actually change anything, but I was more so responding to the world outside of me. Like, okay, if I just fully present in this way, then everything will be fine. After some time, I just kind of got to a place where I was like, I know this isn't it. Like, I know that I don't identify as trans, specifically in a way that makes me want to like make any physical transition. And I was just like, I could just be whatever. I can be in the middle. I can be, sometimes I'm woman, sometimes I'm man. Most of the time I'm neither. Sometimes I'm both at the same time. So being okay and kind of coming to terms with that. Then I just got to a point where I realized like gender is a performance and I can perform it how I want. And so I don't have to fit into one side or another. And I recognize how I can like play around with it for myself, and what I can do to make myself comfortable. So for me, it was a relief to just be able to go into the world and just exist, and not really worry about what people saw or what people thought. For about the last decade or so, my dad has worked in shelters around Cleveland, working with the homeless population and people dealing with housing insecurity. And he recently was recruited to start doing these trainings for mediation around the country. And that turned into doing trainings around kind of LGBTQ competency within your shelter and within your space. And he had a training earlier this year, and he called me and he's like, hey, I want you to give me some feedback. And as we started to have that conversation, he just started telling me about the things that he was learning about gender. And he was like, I realized I never asked you, how do you identify and what pronouns do you use? And I was just like, who am I talking to? I mean, it was like I just smiled. Like I couldn't stop smiling. I was just like, well, that's how I identify. And, it's like sometimes as a woman, sometimes not as either. And I use they, them pronouns when I can. And some people use he pronoun. I mean, I kind of just like explained it out to him and he was like, okay, all right. And that was it. I mean, he's the first person in my family that I've ever told that to. So it's pretty amazing.